The briefing room was packed. A dense, humming energy filled the air as journalists shifted in their seats, testing their microphones, adjusting their cameras. At the podium, Karoline Leavitt stood poised, hands resting lightly on the edges, her expression a masterclass in practiced composure. She had faced the press dozens of times before, but today, something felt different. It wasn't just the usual anticipation of a tough line of questioning. There was an edge to the room, an unspoken tension that clung to every movement, every hushed whisper. The recent wave of policy debates had put the administration on the defensive, and today's press briefing was an opportunity for Karoline to do what she did best: control the message, shape the narrative, and remind the room who was in charge. She took a breath, adjusted the microphone, and began. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started." The response was immediate. Hands shot up across the room, a sea of eager journalists jockeying for attention, their voices overlapping as they called her name. Karoline gestured toward a familiar face, a senior correspondent from a major network, someone she knew would start with a predictable policy question. It was a safe choice, a way to ease into the conversation before the inevitable barrage. The administration's recent stance on economic policy has drawn both support and criticism. The reporter began. "Can you clarify the intent behind the tax revisions?" Karoline nodded, offering a measured smile. "Absolutely. The goal is, and always has been, to create an economy that benefits all Americans, ensuring long-term stability and growth." The expected back and forth played out as she fielded a handful of routine inquiries. But she could feel it coming, the moment of control slipping, the shift in the air. And then a voice, sharper than the rest, cut through the room. "Miss Leavitt, let's talk about transparency. Don't you think the American people deserve straightforward answers instead of rehearsed talking points?" Karoline recognized the voice instantly. Jennifer Reese. A notorious figure in the press corps, Reese had a reputation for pushing, for needling, for turning press briefings into personal battlegrounds. She wasn't here to report, she was here to provoke. Karoline kept her expression neutral. "Jennifer, I always strive to provide the most direct and honest answers possible. If you have a specific question related to today's discussion, I'm happy to address it." Reese leaned forward, her pen tapping against her notepad, her smirk just barely concealed. "Fine. Do you deny that the administration's recent security measures disproportionately affect marginalized communities?" There it was. The pivot. The leading question designed to stir controversy. Karoline inhaled slowly. "The policies in place are designed to ensure national security and public safety without discrimination. We remain committed to fairness in all legislative decisions." Reese pounced. "That's not an answer. A yes or no would suffice. Do you acknowledge that these policies have negative effects on certain communities?" Murmurs rippled through the room. A few journalists exchanged glances. Some looked intrigued, others uneasy. Karoline had been in politics long enough to recognize the setup, the relentless line of questioning designed not for clarity, but for confrontation. She steadied herself. "Jennifer, I understand your concern, but I will not entertain misleading narratives. This administration is committed to equitable governance. If you'd like to discuss the specific data behind these policies, I'm happy to provide it." Reese tilted her head, her smirk widening. "So that's a no comment?" Karoline felt the subtle shift in the room. The tension deepened, the moment thick with anticipation. She could hear the low hum of cameras adjusting their focus, capturing every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion. She exhaled slowly. "That's a clarification. If you're interested in a factual discussion, I'm here for it. If not, I'd like to move on." A brief pause. For a second, it seemed as though the exchange might settle. But then Reese pressed further. Why is it so difficult for this administration to provide direct answers? What are you afraid of? A few reporters scribbled notes furiously, sensing that this was no longer just a press conference, it was a moment. A potential headline. Karoline could feel it, the way narratives were already forming in the room. She tightened her grip on the podium. There is no fear here. There is, however, a commitment to real discussion, not theatrical grandstanding. A quiet murmur ran through the room. Reese's smirk wavered just slightly. The cameras captured everything. Karoline had a choice. Engage further, fuel the spectacle, or shut it down entirely. She sighed, shifting her gaze briefly to the side of the room where security personnel stood stationed. It was a fleeting look, but in a room full of journalists trained to notice everything, it didn't go unnoticed. Reese leaned in further, her voice a whisper, just loud enough to carry. You wouldn't actually remove me for doing my job, would you? Karoline didn't blink. I would never remove a journalist for doing their job. But I will not allow disruptions that prevent others from doing theirs. A silence heavier than before settled over the room. It was the kind of silence that wasn't passive, but expectant. Waiting. Reese glanced around, measuring the moment, weighing her next move. She could force the situation until security was compelled to intervene, turn herself into the story. Or she could back down, let the exchange fade into the broader briefing. She exhaled through her nose, then leaned back in her seat, arms crossing over her chest. A show of defiance, but also a retreat. Karoline adjusted her stance. If anyone else has a question relevant to today's discussion, I'm happy to continue. Another brief pause, then, finally, another hand went up. The tension in the room loosened, just a little. But Karoline knew better than to think it was over. By the time she stepped away from the podium, her phone was already buzzing. And she knew exactly what was waiting for her outside that room. The real battle was just beginning. Karoline stepped out of the briefing room, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind her, but the storm that had begun inside was only just gathering strength. She could already hear the murmur of voices from her staff down the hall, the hurried clatter of keyboards, the steady pinging of notifications. The air outside the press room was thick with the kind of nervous energy that came when anything threatened to spiral beyond control. Her aide, Jordan, was already walking toward her, phone in hand, eyes wide with the urgency of someone who had just watched a wildfire spark to life. It's already trending, Jordan said before Karoline could even ask. Pressgate is blowing up. The clip's spreading like wildfire. The usual crowd is going nuts over it. Karoline inhaled sharply, nodding as she kept walking toward her office. She had been in this game long enough to know how fast things could move. Define going nuts, she said, glancing at Jordan's screen as they stepped into the elevator. Jordan swiped through headlines as the doors closed. Karoline Leavitt snaps at reporter. Is free speech under attack? Leavitt silences tough questions. Transparency under fire administration. Shuts down press freedom. Shocking confrontation. Caught on camera. Karoline let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. You'd think I threw her out myself, Jordan sighed. Doesn't matter. It's all about perception. And right now, the narrative is slipping. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the corridor leading to Karoline's office. Staffers hovered near their desks, their screens filled with live coverage and social media threads. The rapid-fire nature of modern news cycles meant that the incident wasn't just being reported, it was being shaped in real time. Inside her office, Karoline shrugged off her blazer, tossing it over the back of her chair before leaning against her desk. Give me the rundown. Where's our support coming from? Jordan scanned his phone. Conservative media, is backing you hard, calling it a win against performative journalism. They're showing the full clip, saying you handled it professionally. Karoline nodded. And the others? Jordan hesitated. Mainstream outlets are mixed. Some are sticking to just the facts, running the footage without much commentary. But others are running with Reese's angle, claiming you shut down a difficult journalist for asking tough questions. Karoline sighed. So, the usual lines in the sand. Jordan scrolled again. It's not just the news cycle, though. Social media is where the battle's really happening. He turned the phone toward her, showing a thread already thousands of comments deep. She didn't like the question, so she shut it down. Typical. This isn't a press conference. It's a PR stunt. If she can't handle tough questions, she shouldn't have the job. Leavitt was right. That reporter was grandstanding, not reporting. Watch the full clip before judging. The fact that security even looked at the reporter tells you everything. This is what suppression looks like. Karoline exhaled through her nose. She could already see how this was going to play out. The longer the outrage burned, the harder it would be to shift the narrative back in her favor. She turned to Jordan. What's Reese doing? Jordan tapped his screen. Exactly what you'd expect. She's already booked interviews. She's making it sound like she was forcibly removed, which, to be clear, didn't happen. But it doesn't matter. Her phrasing is careful. She's letting people assume the worst without outright lying. Karoline tilted her head back, staring at the ceiling. Predictable. Jordan nodded. She's playing the long game. And it's working. People are eating it up. Karoline straightened. What about the White House? Have they responded? Jordan hesitated. They haven't said anything yet. Karoline narrowed her eyes. That wasn't necessarily a good thing. Silence could mean they were waiting to see how things played out before commenting. Or it could mean they were deciding how much distance to put between her and the administration. Either way, it left her vulnerable. She tapped her fingers against her desk. We need to get ahead of this. If we don't control the narrative, someone else will. Jordan nodded. Agreed. So, what's our move? Karoline paused, thinking. She had a few options. She could go on the offensive, hold another press conference, directly address the situation, call out Reese's tactics, and demand accountability from the media. But that would also mean keeping the story alive longer than necessary. She could go the opposite route, stay silent, let the moment burn out on its own, and hope public interest shifted to the next big controversy. But that was a gamble. Silence could be interpreted as guilt. Or she could take a third option. Something more precise. Something that would shift the conversation without looking like a desperate attempt to control it. She turned to Jordan. We released the full, unedited footage. No commentary, no dramatic edits. Just the raw exchange. Let people see exactly what happened. Jordan nodded, already typing. That's smart. Keeps us from looking defensive, but also puts the truth out there. Karoline smirked. And make sure the caption is clear. Something like, watch for yourself. The full exchange from today's press briefing. Jordan grinned. Subtle, just enough to nudge people without telling them what to think. Karoline nodded. Exactly. The moment we tell people how to feel, we lose credibility. Let them come to their own conclusions. Jordan gave her a thumbs up. I'll get the team on it. As he left the office, Karoline sat back in her chair, staring at her phone as notifications continued to roll in. She knew this wasn't over. The moment was already too big, too viral to disappear overnight. But she also knew how these battles were won. Not through anger, not through panic, but through patience, precision, and knowing when to make the right move. She exhaled, a small smirk playing at her lips. Let's see how they handle the truth. Karoline watched as the video upload ticked toward completion. The full unedited footage was now out in the wild, circulating in the same digital storm that had threatened to consume her just hours before. She leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. Jordan reappeared in the doorway, his expression tense but focused. It's live. We're already seeing engagement. Some people are doubling down on their takes, but others, they're rethinking. He scrolled through his phone. Didn't look like she shut her down to me. This actually makes Reese look bad. Journalists should ask real questions, not set traps. Karoline nodded. Good. That's all we need, a shift, a crack in the outrage. Let the noise burn itself out. Jordan hesitated. Reese is still pushing. Karoline sighed, barely suppressing her irritation. Of course, she is. She's claiming the release of the full footage is an attempt to control the narrative, that it's a deflection. Karoline let out a dry laugh. So, transparency is now manipulation? Jordan smirked. Welcome to the modern news cycle. Karoline turned her gaze to the window, the city stretching out before her, its heartbeat pulsing with a million distractions, a million shifting conversations. She had played this game long enough to know how it worked. The outrage machine would churn, new scandals would emerge, and within days, maybe even hours, something else would steal the headlines. Her phone vibrated on the desk. A message from an old colleague. Handled that well. Don't let them shake you. She smirked, then typed a quick reply. They never do. Outside, she could hear the steady rhythm of the office, the buzz of voices strategizing, responding, staying ahead. This wasn't the first time she had been in the fire, and it wouldn't be the last. Karoline straightened in her chair, exhaling slowly. The storm hadn't passed yet, but she had done what she needed to. Now, all she had to do was wait. And in the end, she knew truth always outlasted the noise. What do you think? Was Karoline right to shut down the spectacle, or was Reese just doing her job? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns like this, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more coming your way.